The most dangerous mistake is not believing someone is guilty. It is believing you already know who deserves to be trusted. The soft ring of the entrance bell echoed through Maple Street Diner just after 8:30 on a bright Tuesday morning, blending with the comforting sounds of clinking coffee mugs, sizzling bacon on the grill, and quiet conversations between regular customers who had started their mornings there for years. Warm sunlight poured through the large front windows, casting golden reflections across polished wooden tables, while the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled every corner of the restaurant. Waitresses moved gracefully between booths carrying steaming plates of pancakes, eggs, and toast. Truck drivers laughed over breakfast near the counter. A retired couple quietly shared the morning newspaper, and a young family celebrated a little boy's birthday with chocolate chip waffles in the corner booth. Everything felt ordinary, predictable, and safe. Then the front door opened again. Officer Ethan Collins stepped inside wearing a neatly pressed police uniform, his polished badge catching the morning light as every casual conversation slowly faded into curious silence. His eyes swept across the diner before stopping on one woman seated alone near the back window. Vanessa Carter wore a simple navy business suit with a light blouse beneath it. A black leather briefcase rested neatly beside her chair, untouched since she arrived nearly 20 minutes earlier. A white ceramic coffee cup sat in front of her, barely half empty, while a folded newspaper remained unopened beside a small notebook. She looked completely relaxed, quietly watching people enter and leave without appearing interested in anyone in particular. Yet there was something about her calm expression that contrasted sharply with the nervous energy suddenly filling the room. Ethan walked directly toward her table with measured confidence. Every customer instinctively followed him with their eyes. One waitress stopped pouring coffee halfway through filling a mug. The cook leaned slightly through the kitchen window to see what was happening. Vanessa slowly looked up, meeting the officer's gaze without surprise or fear. "Good morning, ma'am," Ethan said in a firm but controlled voice. "May I ask you to step away from the table for a moment?" Several customers immediately exchanged uncertain glances. Vanessa gently placed her coffee cup onto its saucer before answering with remarkable composure. "May I ask why?" Ethan kept his posture straight. "We received information concerning suspicious activity involving someone matching your description." The words settled over the diner like a sudden storm cloud. Conversations stopped completely. Forks rested quietly on plates. Even the birthday table fell silent as curious eyes turned toward the woman sitting alone near the window. Vanessa remained perfectly still. "I understand," she replied softly. "And what would you like me to do?" Ethan glanced briefly toward the black leather briefcase beside her chair. "I would like to ask you to stand while I verify a few things." Vanessa looked toward the briefcase for only a second before returning her attention to the officer. "Very well." She rose slowly without complaint, smoothing the sleeve of her jacket as she stood. There was no frustration in her face, no visible anxiety, only extraordinary patience. That patience somehow unsettled Ethan more than resistance ever could have. Most people questioned authority. Others protested loudly. Vanessa did neither. She simply waited. A teenage customer quietly reached for his phone beneath the table. Another customer followed. Within moments, several people had begun recording the unusual encounter. The waitress nearest the counter whispered to her coworker, "She has been sitting there since before 8:15. She has hardly touched her breakfast." Her coworker answered, "She does not look nervous." Ethan heard neither comment. His attention remained fixed on Vanessa. "Do you have identification with you?" he asked. Vanessa nodded once. "Yes. Please keep your hands visible for the moment." "Of course." The answer came without hesitation. Somewhere beyond the front windows, a city bus rolled past, its brakes hissing softly before disappearing down Maple Street. Inside the diner, however, time itself seemed to slow. Vanessa briefly glanced at the antique wall clock hanging above the pie display. 8:32. Her eyes lingered there for barely a heartbeat before returning to Ethan. Nobody else noticed the glance. Nobody realized she had been watching that clock every few minutes since arriving. Then, from inside the black leather briefcase resting beside her chair, a muted vibration quietly broke the silence. Vanessa did not reach for it. She did not even look down. But Ethan heard it immediately. His eyes narrowed toward the briefcase while the room collectively held its breath. Hidden beneath the polished leather, A screen illuminated for only an instant before fading once again. The words displayed across it were visible to no one except the person who already knew exactly what they meant. FBI operations. The quiet vibration faded almost as quickly as it had begun, yet Vanessa Carter made no attempt to touch the black leather briefcase resting beside her chair. Instead, she calmly folded her hands in front of her, her attention never leaving Officer Ethan Collins. The restraint puzzled him immediately. Most people would have instinctively reached for the source of the sound. Vanessa acted as though it had never happened. Ethan looked down at the briefcase before raising his eyes again. "Was that your phone?" he asked. Vanessa answered without hesitation. "Yes. Would you like to check it?" She gently shook her head. "Not yet." The answer lingered in the silence. Several customers exchanged uncertain looks. The young waitress standing near the coffee station quietly whispered, "Who ignores a phone like that?" The older cook wiped his hands on a towel before replying under his breath, "Someone who thinks something else is more important." Ethan noticed the exchange, but remained focused on Vanessa. "May I ask what is inside the briefcase?" Vanessa answered with the same calm tone she had used from the beginning. "Documents. Business documents? Important documents." Ethan folded his arms. "That does not tell me very much." Vanessa offered a polite smile that revealed neither irritation nor fear. "It tells you everything I am allowed to say right now." The reply only deepened his suspicion. Around them, Maple Street Diner continued to exist in an uneasy balance between ordinary life and unexpected tension. Fresh coffee continued brewing behind the counter. A waitress quietly delivered pancakes to a nearby family. Outside, traffic moved steadily along the street as morning commuters hurried toward work. Inside, however, nearly every customer had forgotten about breakfast. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the woman standing quietly beside the back window. Ethan glanced briefly toward the antique wall clock mounted above the pie display. 8:33. He noticed Vanessa's eyes drift toward the same clock only for an instant before returning to him. "You seem concerned about the time," he observed. Vanessa answered honestly. "I am." "Why?" "Because someone is depending on it." The statement immediately drew another wave of whispers through the diner. Ethan looked carefully at her face, searching for signs of deception, but found none. Her breathing remained steady. Her posture never changed. Even her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone speaking simple facts rather than carefully rehearsed answers. "Who is depending on it?" he asked. Vanessa looked briefly toward the entrance before answering. "Someone who deserves to arrive without unnecessary attention." Ethan followed her gaze toward the front door. Customers entered and left the diner every few minutes. A delivery driver carried 2 large boxes into the kitchen. An elderly man wearing suspenders paid his bill before waving goodbye to the staff. Nothing appeared unusual. "I do not understand," Ethan admitted. Vanessa nodded slightly. "I know." Her answer was neither dismissive nor sarcastic. It sounded almost sympathetic. The officer stepped one pace closer. "Then help me understand." Vanessa remained silent for several seconds before speaking again. Sometimes explaining too early creates more problems than waiting a little longer. Those words seemed strangely out of place, yet something about them felt genuine. A businessman seated near the entrance quietly lowered the newspaper he had been pretending to read. In reality, he had spent the last several minutes observing every exchange without drawing attention to himself. Vanessa noticed him through her peripheral vision, but gave no sign of recognition. Moments later, he folded the newspaper neatly, glanced toward the wall clock, then looked out the front window before returning to his coffee. The movement lasted less than 2 seconds. Nobody noticed except Vanessa. Ethan completely missed it. He remained focused on the woman standing before him. "I still need to verify your identity," he said. Vanessa nodded once. "You will. Now." She looked toward the clock again. 8:34. Very soon. Another muted vibration came from inside the briefcase. Once again, Vanessa ignored it. This time, Ethan heard it more clearly. His attention immediately shifted toward the polished leather case resting beside the chair. Whatever was happening, it was becoming increasingly difficult to believe it was an ordinary breakfast meeting. Vanessa quietly drew a slow breath. Knowing every passing second brought the morning closer to the moment she had been waiting for, while also bringing the entire operation dangerously close to being exposed. Vanessa Carter kept her eyes on the antique clock for only a fraction of a second before calmly returning her attention to Officer Ethan Collins. 8:34. Every minute carried weight, though nobody inside Maple Street Diner understood why. Ethan interpreted her repeated glances as nervousness. Vanessa knew they meant something entirely different. The person she had been waiting for had never been late before. If the carefully planned meeting missed its narrow window, months of quiet preparation could disappear before a single conversation even began. "You keep looking at the clock," Ethan observed. "Are you expecting someone?" Vanessa answered with complete honesty. "Yes." "Who?" She paused before speaking. "Someone who has taken a great risk just by deciding to come here." Ethan studied her face, searching for any sign that she was inventing the story as she spoke. Instead, he found remarkable consistency. Every answer fit the previous one. Every word remained calm. She never contradicted herself. That should have reassured him. Somehow, it did the opposite. Near the front entrance, the businessman who had been quietly reading the newspaper folded it one final time and stood from his booth. He straightened his jacket, placed several bills beneath his coffee cup, and walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms before disappearing from sight. To everyone else inside the diner, it looked completely ordinary. Vanessa followed the movement only through her peripheral vision. She knew better than to stare. Across the room, another customer entered through the front door carrying a weathered baseball cap in one hand and a small brown paper bag in the other. He looked like an ordinary office worker stopping for breakfast before work. He nodded politely to the hostess, ordered black coffee to go, then quietly selected a stool near the counter with a clear view of the dining room. Vanessa noticed him immediately. He was not part of the original briefing. The unexpected arrival sharpened every instinct she had developed during decades of federal service. Something had changed. Ethan noticed none of it. His attention never left Vanessa. "Would you mind opening the briefcase?" he asked. Vanessa looked down at the polished black leather case resting beside her chair. "I cannot do that right now." "Why not?" "Because opening it before the right moment would affect someone besides me." The answer only increased the uncertainty spreading through the diner. A truck driver quietly leaned toward the waitress and whispered, "This is getting stranger by the minute." She nodded without taking her eyes off Vanessa. She still has not raised her voice once. Ethan stepped slightly closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Ma'am, I need you to understand that refusing simple requests makes this situation more complicated." Vanessa met his eyes with quiet sincerity. "Officer, I understand exactly how this looks. Then help me make sense of it." She drew a slow breath. Sometimes protecting another person requires accepting that you may be misunderstood for a little while. Those words lingered in the silence longer than anyone expected. Ethan frowned, trying to connect them to the report that had brought him there. Nothing matched. The woman standing before him did not resemble the suspicious person he had imagined while driving to the diner. She spoke calmly. She cooperated with every instruction except the one request that mattered most. Yet even that refusal sounded less like defiance and more like responsibility. Outside the front windows, a delivery van rolled slowly past before disappearing around the corner. Sunlight reflected across parked cars and spilled through the glass, casting warm patterns across the polished wooden floor. Inside the diner, breakfast continued growing colder on untouched plates while curiosity quietly replaced appetite. Vanessa glanced toward the hallway where the businessman had disappeared moments earlier. He had not returned. That absence concerned her more than anything Ethan had said. Then the black leather briefcase vibrated again, slightly longer this time. Ethan looked down immediately. Vanessa did not move. She already knew what the message would say without reading it. The contact was inside the diner. The meeting was beginning. And somewhere only a few yards away, another pair of unseen eyes was already watching everything unfold. Vanessa Carter remained perfectly still beside her table, allowing the silence inside Maple Street Diner to stretch a little longer. She knew that every unnecessary movement could ripple through the room in ways nobody else could predict. The businessman who had disappeared down the hallway had not returned. The office worker wearing the baseball cap continued sipping his coffee near the counter, appearing completely relaxed while quietly watching the reflections in the front window instead of looking directly at anyone. To every other customer, they were simply strangers sharing breakfast beneath the same roof. Vanessa understood that appearances often concealed far more than they revealed. Officer Ethan Collins interpreted her silence differently. "Ma'am," he said in a firmer voice, "I need you to step away from the table completely." Vanessa nodded politely and took one slow step backward, leaving the chair and the black leather briefcase exactly where they were. "Thank you," Ethan replied before glancing toward the case once more. "Now I would like to inspect the briefcase." Vanessa calmly answered, "I respectfully ask that you wait another minute." Ethan frowned. "You have asked me to wait several times already." "I know. Why exactly one more minute?" Vanessa looked toward the antique wall clock without moving her head. 8:35. "Because after that, everything will make sense." Her answer immediately sparked another wave of quiet whispers. The young waitress, carrying a fresh pot of coffee, stopped beside the counter without realizing she had forgotten to refill the cups in front of waiting customers. A retired firefighter sitting near the entrance quietly folded his newspaper and watched with growing curiosity. Even the little boy celebrating his birthday leaned toward his mother and whispered, "Is that lady in trouble?" His mother gently squeezed his shoulder before softly replying, "We do not know the whole story yet." Vanessa silently appreciated those words. Most people never realized how much trouble could begin when conclusions arrived before facts. Ethan shifted his attention back toward the briefcase. "Is there anything dangerous inside?" Vanessa answered immediately. "No." "Anything illegal?" "No." "Then why can you not simply open it?" Vanessa held his gaze. "Because what is inside belongs to something much larger than me." Ethan took a slow breath. The answer sounded sincere, yet it left him no closer to understanding the situation. He reached toward the radio attached to his shoulder and quietly requested another patrol unit to stop by the diner as a precaution. The transmission was calm and professional, but hearing it changed the atmosphere instantly. Several customers looked toward the windows, expecting another police vehicle to arrive at any moment. Vanessa closed her eyes for barely a heartbeat before opening them again. Reinforcements were exactly what she had hoped to avoid. More officers meant more attention. More attention meant a greater chance that the person she had been waiting for would lose confidence and leave before the meeting could happen. She carefully glanced toward the office worker sitting near the counter. He lifted his coffee cup, paused halfway to his lips, then quietly placed it back onto the saucer untouched. It was the smallest movement imaginable, but to Vanessa it spoke volumes. He had noticed the radio call. Across the diner, the businessman finally emerged from the hallway carrying nothing more than a receipt in his hand. He walked calmly toward the register, paid for a meal he had barely touched, and paused near the entrance as though debating whether to leave. Vanessa recognized the hesitation immediately. The carefully planned meeting was beginning to unravel. She had spent months earning someone's trust, and now that trust balanced on seconds instead of weeks. Ethan noticed her brief glance toward the front door. "Do you know that man?" he asked. Vanessa answered truthfully, "I hope he still decides to stay." The response only deepened the mystery. Ethan looked from Vanessa to the businessman, then toward the office worker at the counter, slowly realizing that several unrelated moments inside the diner might not have been unrelated at all. Before he could ask another question, the muted vibration came once again from inside the black leather briefcase. This time it lasted longer than before. Vanessa already knew what the message would say. The contact had reached the point where waiting was no longer possible. Whatever happened next would decide whether the morning ended with a successful meeting or with months of careful work quietly disappearing through the front door. Edit. Vanessa Carter watched the businessman near the entrance slowly reach for the door handle before stopping once again. His hesitation lasted no more than 2 seconds, yet it told her everything she needed to know. He had seen the police officer. He had heard the request for another patrol unit. Most importantly, he no longer believed this diner was a safe place to finish the meeting. Months of careful planning were beginning to slip away because confidence disappeared much faster than it was earned. Vanessa remained composed, refusing to let even the smallest hint of urgency appear on her face. Officer Ethan Collins mistook her calm expression for acceptance. "Thank you for cooperating," he said. "We can resolve this quickly if you simply allow me to inspect the briefcase." Vanessa answered in the same measured tone she had maintained since the beginning. "Officer, I promise you that I am cooperating." Ethan looked puzzled. "Then why does every answer create another question?" Vanessa glanced briefly toward the businessman before replying. Because sometimes the truth cannot arrive all at once. Around them, Maple Street Diner seemed suspended between two completely different mornings. Fresh biscuits emerged from the kitchen oven, filling the room with the comforting smell of butter and warm bread. Coffee continued pouring into white ceramic mugs. The waitress finally remembered the untouched cups she had forgotten to refill, but even while moving between tables, she could not stop looking toward the unusual conversation near the back window. Customers who had never met one another quietly shared uncertain expressions, each trying to understand a situation that seemed to become more mysterious with every passing minute. The office worker wearing the baseball cap remained seated at the counter, his coffee untouched. He casually unfolded a receipt, looked at it for only a moment, then folded it again before placing it beside his cup. The movement looked meaningless to everyone else. Vanessa recognized it immediately. It was a signal. The contact had confirmed he was ready, but he was also warning that someone unexpected might be observing the meeting. Her instincts sharpened. Whatever had begun as a simple exchange of information was now balanced on an increasingly fragile foundation. Ethan followed Vanessa's eyes once more. "You keep watching people," he observed. Vanessa answered honestly. "Because people matter. Do you know either of those men?" She paused just long enough to avoid revealing more than she should. "I know one of them needs to leave here safely." Ethan frowned. "Who?" Vanessa gently shook her head. "I cannot answer that." The officer slowly exhaled. His training reminded him that calm cooperation often deserved patience, yet the report that had brought him to the diner urged him to continue. He looked toward the briefcase again. If there is nothing dangerous inside, opening it would settle this immediately. Vanessa smiled faintly, not because she found the situation amusing, but because she wished it were truly that simple. Opening it now would settle one question while creating many more. Those words echoed quietly across the room. The retired firefighter leaned back in his booth and whispered to the waitress. "She speaks like someone carrying responsibility instead of excuses." The waitress nodded. "I was thinking the same thing." Outside the front windows, another vehicle slowed briefly before continuing down Maple Street. Sunlight reflected across its windshield, sending bright flashes through the diner before disappearing again. Vanessa looked at the antique wall clock. 8:36. Less than a minute remained before the meeting window closed. She could almost feel time slipping through her hands. The businessman quietly released the door handle and stepped away from the entrance, but he did not return to his table. Instead, he stood beside the front window pretending to study the breakfast menu posted on the glass. The office worker at the counter noticed the movement without turning his head. Two strangers. Two silent signals. One operation balance between success and failure. Then the muted vibration came again from inside the black leather briefcase, followed almost immediately by a second vibration only a heartbeat later. Vanessa already knew what the double alert meant. The federal support team had reached the area outside the diner. They were waiting for one final confirmation before stepping inside. She lifted her eyes toward Ethan with the same quiet confidence she had shown all morning and softly said, "Officer, I believe the answers you have been looking for are about to walk through that door." Vanessa Carter held Ethan Collins's gaze without the slightest trace of anxiety. The words she had just spoken settled quietly across Maple Street Diner, leaving everyone wondering what could possibly happen next. Ethan instinctively glanced toward the front entrance, expecting to see someone walk through the door immediately. Instead, the glass door remained closed. Outside, morning traffic continued flowing along Maple Street, while pedestrians passed the restaurant without giving it a second thought. Inside, however, the atmosphere had completely changed. Every customer seemed to be waiting for the same invisible moment. Ethan looked back at Vanessa. "Who exactly am I waiting for?" he asked. Vanessa answered softly, "You are waiting for the truth." Ethan sighed quietly. "You keep saying things like that." Vanessa nodded. "Because they are still true." The officer looked toward the black leather briefcase resting beside the chair. "I am giving you one last opportunity. Please open the briefcase." Vanessa remained respectful. "Officer, I cannot open it until the meeting is complete." "There has not been a meeting." "Not yet." "Then why are you protecting it?" Vanessa replied without hesitation. "Because someone trusted me to." Her answer sounded so genuine that even Ethan hesitated before speaking again. Across the diner, The businessman standing near the front window casually adjusted the sleeve of his jacket before taking one slow step toward the exit. At the same time, the office worker wearing the baseball cap quietly stood from his stool, picked up his untouched coffee, and began walking toward the condiment station. Their movements appeared completely unrelated, yet Vanessa immediately recognized the silent coordination. The contact had decided to continue after all, but only if the final exchange could happen naturally without attracting attention. She understood the opportunity would last only seconds. Ethan noticed her brief glance across the room once again. "You know those people," he said. Vanessa answered carefully. "I know someone here came because they believed they would be safe." Ethan looked toward the businessman, then toward the office worker, trying to understand the connection. Before he could ask another question, the muted vibration inside the briefcase sounded once more. This time Vanessa gently closed her eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. She already knew the message. The federal support team had arrived outside the diner and was waiting for her signal that the source had successfully delivered the information. Ethan heard the vibration clearly. "You have ignored that phone every single time," he observed. Vanessa smiled faintly. "Because answering it too early would have defeated the reason I came here." At that exact moment, the businessman slowly walked past Vanessa's table. Without stopping, he placed a neatly folded customer receipt on the edge of the table beside her untouched coffee cup, thanked the waitress for breakfast, and continued toward the exit. The movement looked completely ordinary. No one except Vanessa noticed that the receipt felt slightly heavier than ordinary paper. She never reached for it. She simply allowed it to remain exactly where it had been placed. The office worker wearing the baseball cap quietly watched the exchange through the reflection in the polished coffee machine before calmly leaving cash beside his untouched cup and walking toward the opposite exit. Two strangers entered. Two strangers left. To everyone else, nothing important had happened. Vanessa knew the operation had just been completed. She slowly looked back at Ethan. "It is finished now," she said. Ethan frowned. "What is finished?" Vanessa finally reached down and picked up the folded receipt resting beside her coffee. She slipped it carefully into the outer pocket of the black leather briefcase before placing one hand inside her navy jacket. Every customer instinctively held their breath. Ethan watched her movement carefully, but Vanessa moved with complete transparency, making sure every gesture remained slow and unmistakable. She removed a slim black leather credential wallet and held it closed in the palm of her hand without opening it. At that same instant, the front windows reflected two dark sport utility vehicles quietly pulling into the diner parking lot. Several professionally dressed men and women stepped out, walking calmly toward the entrance with the confidence of people arriving exactly where they were expected to be. Vanessa looked at Ethan with the same composed expression she had carried all morning. "Officer," she said gently, "I believe this is the moment I have been asking you to wait for." Vanessa Carter held the closed leather credential wallet in the palm of her hand, while the entire diner seemed to fall into complete silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the waitress standing beside the coffee station remained perfectly still with a fresh pot of coffee suspended in her hands. Outside the front windows, the two dark sport utility vehicles came to a smooth stop beneath the morning sunlight. Four professionally dressed men and women stepped out wearing dark business suits instead of uniforms. Their pace was calm, measured, and deliberate. They did not rush toward the entrance. They simply walked with the quiet confidence of people arriving exactly where they were expected to be. Officer Ethan Collins glanced toward the windows before looking back at Vanessa. "Who are they?" he asked. Vanessa answered with complete composure. "People who have been waiting for the same moment I have." Ethan slowly turned his attention back to the black credential wallet resting in her hand. "Please identify yourself." Vanessa gave a respectful nod. "Of course." She carefully unfolded the leather wallet just enough for the gold badge and official credentials inside to become visible. The polished badge reflected the warm morning light streaming through the diner windows. Ethan leaned forward to read the identification, his expression changing almost immediately. His eyes moved slowly across the credentials before returning to Vanessa's face as though searching for some explanation beyond what he had just read. The words were unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Director Vanessa Carter. For several long seconds Ethan said nothing. The confidence that had guided every decision since entering the diner quietly disappeared, replaced by genuine disbelief. Around them, customers lowered their phones one by one. The retired firefighter slowly removed his glasses and looked again, convinced he had misunderstood what he had just witnessed. The young waitress softly whispered, "Director," before covering her mouth in surprise. Vanessa calmly closed the credential wallet and slipped it back inside her jacket without the slightest hint of pride or triumph. She simply stood exactly as she had from the beginning, calm, patient, and professional. Before Ethan could gather his thoughts, the entrance bell rang softly once more. The professionally dressed team entered the diner with quiet confidence. A woman carrying a slim black portfolio approached Vanessa first and smiled respectfully. "Good morning, Director Carter," she said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The source has safely departed, and the materials have been secured." Vanessa returned the smile with a simple nod. "Excellent work, Agent Mitchell." Another agent stepped forward holding a secure document case. "Director, the field office has already confirmed receipt of the evidence." Vanessa answered calmly. "Then the operation may proceed exactly as planned." Every sentence quietly transformed the room. Customers who had believed they were watching an ordinary police investigation now realized they had unknowingly witnessed the final moments of a carefully coordinated federal operation. Ethan remained standing in silence, replaying every conversation they had shared over the past several minutes. Vanessa turned toward him with the same steady expression she had carried throughout the morning. "Officer Collins," she said gently, "I understand why you asked questions. Public safety matters." Ethan looked down briefly before answering. "I did not understand what was happening." Vanessa nodded. Very few people were supposed to. She glanced briefly toward the front window where the businessman and the office worker had already disappeared into the morning traffic, their identities still protected exactly as intended. Sometimes protecting the truth requires allowing people to misunderstand you for a little while. Ethan slowly exhaled. "You knew who those people were the entire time." Vanessa answered honestly. "I knew one person trusted us with information that could affect many lives. That trust mattered more than explaining myself a few minutes earlier." The words settled deeply over the diner. Nobody celebrated. Nobody applauded. Instead, an overwhelming silence filled the room as every customer quietly reconsidered the assumptions they had made only moments before. The operation had succeeded without dramatic confrontation. The source had remained protected. The evidence had reached federal investigators. And standing beside an untouched cup of coffee that had long since grown cold, Director Vanessa Carter demonstrated that the strongest authority was never announced by a title. It was revealed through patience, discipline, and the quiet confidence to let the truth arrive at exactly the right moment. The silence inside Maple Street Diner lingered long after the last words were spoken. It was not the uncomfortable silence that had filled the room earlier when people believed they were witnessing something suspicious. This silence carried reflection. Customers who had quietly formed opinions only minutes before now found themselves reconsidering every assumption they had made since Officer Ethan Collins first walked through the front door. Director Vanessa Carter noticed the change immediately, yet she showed no satisfaction. Her attention remained fixed on the mission rather than the misunderstanding that had briefly surrounded it. Agent Mitchell stepped beside her and quietly handed over a secure envelope. "Director, the evidence has already been transferred to the field office," she said. "The analysts have confirmed that everything is intact." Vanessa accepted the envelope with a grateful nod. "Excellent. Then the source took a considerable risk for the right reason." Agent Mitchell smiled slightly. He said he finally believed someone would protect him. Vanessa looked toward the front window where the morning traffic continued flowing through Maple Street as though nothing unusual had happened. That trust was always the most important part of today's operation. Officer Ethan Collins remained standing beside the table, carefully replaying every moment in his mind. He remembered Vanessa's repeated requests for one more minute. He remembered the unanswered phone vibrations, the untouched coffee, the repeated glances toward the clock, and the briefcase he had been so determined to inspect. Every detail suddenly fit together with perfect clarity. "Director Carter," he said quietly. Vanessa turned toward him with the same calm expression she had carried throughout the morning. "Yes, officer." Ethan took a slow breath before speaking. "I believed I was preventing a problem. Instead, I almost became one. Vanessa did not answer immediately. She allowed the words to settle before responding. You acted on the information you believed you had. The important question is what we choose to do after learning something new. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I should have spent more time asking questions before reaching conclusions. Vanessa offered a respectful smile. Experience teaches all of us that patience often reveals facts that urgency never will. Around them, the customers gradually returned to their breakfasts, but the conversations sounded different now. The retired firefighter quietly told the young waitress, I have worn a uniform before. The hardest lesson is remembering that every person has a story you cannot see. She nodded while refilling his coffee. I do not think I will forget today. At the birthday table, the little boy looked up at his mother and softly asked, was that lady helping people? His mother smiled warmly. Yes. Sometimes the people doing the biggest jobs look exactly like everyone else. Those simple words reached Vanessa's ears as she gathered her briefcase from beside the chair. She appreciated them because they reflected the very principle that had guided her career for decades. Real leadership rarely announced itself. It quietly fulfilled its responsibility while allowing others to receive the credit for feeling safe. Outside, another local patrol vehicle slowly entered the parking lot in response to Ethan's earlier request. The arriving officer stepped inside the diner, only to find the situation already resolved. Ethan calmly explained that no additional assistance was necessary. There was no embarrassment in his voice, only professionalism. The second officer acknowledged the update with a respectful nod before wishing everyone a safe day and returning to his patrol car. Agent Mitchell quietly observed the exchange before speaking to Vanessa. The field office has also informed internal affairs about the circumstances, so they have a complete record of today's incident. Vanessa answered calmly. The report should reflect every fact exactly as it occurred. Accuracy matters more than appearances. Ethan looked at her with genuine appreciation. He had expected criticism. Instead, he had received fairness. That realization affected him far more deeply than public embarrassment ever could have. Vanessa adjusted the strap of her briefcase across her shoulder and glanced once more at the now empty coffee cup that had remained untouched through nearly the entire operation. The coffee had grown cold, but the mission had succeeded. The source remained protected. The evidence had been delivered. The investigation would continue. As she prepared to leave the diner alongside her federal team, the atmosphere no longer carried tension. It carried understanding. Everyone present had witnessed the same events, but they would leave remembering something different. They had arrived believing authority was measured by who asked the questions. They departed understanding that true authority was measured by who remained patient enough to protect the truth until the right moment finally arrived. Vanessa Carter paused beside the entrance of Maple Street Diner before stepping outside into the warm Georgia morning. The spring sunlight reflected softly across the polished windows behind her, while the quiet sounds of passing traffic blended with birds singing from nearby trees. For the first time since she had arrived, she allowed herself a slow breath. Not because the pressure had finally ended, but because the people who had placed their trust in the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been protected exactly as promised. Agent Mitchell opened the rear door of the waiting sport utility vehicle and placed the secured briefcase inside before turning toward Vanessa. Director, headquarters has already confirmed the evidence is being processed, she said. Vanessa nodded. Good. Then today's work continues exactly where it should. She glanced briefly back toward the diner. Through the front window, she could still see customers returning to their breakfasts, conversations slowly replacing silence as ordinary life resumed. That was always her favorite outcome. When an operation ended successfully, innocent people could simply continue living their lives without ever realizing how close uncertainty had come. Officer Ethan Collins stepped outside a few moments later. He removed his cap, walked toward Vanessa with quiet respect, and stopped several feet away. Director Carter, he said. Vanessa turned toward him with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the morning. Ethan looked directly at her before speaking again. I have spent my career believing experience taught me how to recognize suspicious behavior. Today reminded me that experience can also create blind spots if I stop asking questions. Vanessa listened without interruption. Ethan continued, I judged the situation before I understood it. I appreciate the patience you showed me even when I made your job more difficult. Vanessa smiled gently. Officer Collins, every profession carries responsibility. The difference is not whether we make mistakes. The difference is whether we are willing to learn from them. Ethan nodded slowly. I will remember that. Vanessa looked toward the quiet diner one last time before answering. The people we meet every day carry stories we cannot see. Respect should never depend on discovering who someone is after the fact. The words settled naturally between them. There was no anger, no victory, only understanding. Ethan extended his hand. Vanessa accepted it without hesitation. The handshake lasted only a moment, yet it carried more meaning than every misunderstanding that had preceded it. Nearby, the young waitress stepped outside to sweep the front sidewalk before work became busy again. She smiled as she watched the two professionals part with mutual respect instead of resentment. Inside, the retired firefighter folded his newspaper and quietly said to the cashier, "That was not a story about authority. That was a story about character." The cashier smiled in agreement. And character is harder to recognize than a badge. Across the street, children waited for the crossing signal while parents held their hands. Delivery trucks continued making morning stops. Life moved forward exactly as it had before, untouched by the federal operation that had quietly protected countless future victims from crimes they would never know had been prevented. Vanessa entered the waiting vehicle, opened the secure folder resting beside her, and began reviewing the next stage of the investigation before the engine even started. There would be another meeting, another source, another person hoping someone would keep a promise made in confidence. She welcomed that responsibility because it reminded her why leadership was never about recognition. It was about serving others without expecting applause. As the vehicles pulled away from Maple Street Diner, the restaurant gradually disappeared in the rearview mirror, becoming just another familiar building along an ordinary street. Yet everyone who had witnessed the events of that morning carried home a lesson far more lasting than the memory of an unexpected encounter. They learned that appearances could mislead, assumptions could fail, and patience could protect truths that urgency might destroy. Most of all, they learned that genuine authority never needed to announce itself. It revealed itself quietly through integrity, humility, and the unwavering commitment to treat every person with dignity before knowing their title, their profession, or the badge they carried.